Teacher, I think we're all set.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Hi there. Good evening. My name is Deidre Cuffey-Gray. I'm the College and Career Advisor, as you can see from the banner. I like to actually refer to myself as the Friendly Neighborhood College and Career Advisor, but it was too many characters, so I had to go with the short version. But I think most students know me as the Friendly Neighborhood College and Career Advisor, and mostly that is to de-escalate what is sometimes a very stressful situation, which is thinking about life after ARHS. My hope tonight really is to speak to parents and guardians of juniors or maybe 9th or 10th graders about this process, knowing, like really acknowledging that in as much as students who are the class of 2020 or the class of 2021 were immersed in what COVID realities meant for the college planning process, or they sort of were steeped in that water, either as seniors whose process was upended by COVID and not being able to visit colleges that they'd been admitted to in the spring, or juniors who have been really living this since March of their junior year, so much so that they took an SAT on March 14th, maybe it was the Saturday before school closed, so that they have sort of been tracking the changes, whereas a parent of a junior might not. And so just want to take some time to maybe bring you up to speed around that. I think my other title is buffer. And the reason I say that is that you are essentially launching your juniors into adulthood with this process. And it's stressful and it causes tension. And a lot of that is because you are having conversations that you might not have had before with your junior, even if this is the third junior that you've gone through this process with. That here are some young people sort of on the edge of 17 and on the edge of 18, trying to be independent. And then they are also in the midst of this high stakes process, which I think we attribute a lot of, like, are you winning or are you losing to? And so it is stressful, and they're trying to do it on their own, and you're trying to get in there. They don't come home and show you every piece of work that they've done, and it has the added stress of money, like affordability, like what can a family afford? What are your students? What do you expect your students' responsibilities to be for this really probably one of the larger decisions that they'll make in their new adult lives, with money that's not theirs. And so all those things, that independence, right, from that junior, and these issues of like all these pieces of this admissions process come together and literally collide. So when I say buffer, my hope is that that I and the counselors who have been doing this for a very long time at ARHS can provide an opportunity to sort of add into the conversation of your junior. You know, lots of times, like if I say, if I'm talking to a junior who's named Deidre, I said, we're on Team Deidre, and that is a big number of people. So just to go ahead and name it, that there is the college and career advisor, but there's also your counselor of a number of years who knows your student for the length of time that they've been their counselor, and Crystal Garrity, who is the guidance secretary, who does an incredible job of managing the process with us. So we're here to be part of your Team 2022 junior with this process. And so just to sort of give you a sense of what I'm hoping for tonight is I want to just spend a little bit of time outlining the process as we know it here at ARHS, and thinking about life after ARHS, and also really highlight the fact that the conversations that I'm having with students, with juniors and seniors, is not just about college. That there are a number of pathways that students explore. I think emerging in this role at ARHS, which has primarily been about college, is also conversations about career and that also speaks about gap year or getting a certificate or getting a 2-year degree or getting a job or enlisting in the military or signing up with just an incredible range of AmeriCorps programs, like figuring out what a next step is going to be for your junior and senior that makes sense. And so that it's a work in progress, that broadening. And so I'm learning and just really here to sort of engage in conversation with you and your junior about what the possibilities are. And so that's just sort of the initial piece. So so I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so talking a bit about what happens and during the junior year for juniors at Amherst Regional High School, and sort of what's in place for us in terms of support and logistics. And then what I want to do is open it up to questions. So the first thing is that we want to start with your junior. And so I have spent a little bit of time in some classrooms, and we'll do spend some more time meeting with juniors to just introduce myself and talk about the process. But the first question that I ask them is what's important to them? Like, what are their values? What's important really personally to them in terms of values? And then move into preferences. Like, what deep preferences do they have for their next step? What kind of community do they want to be a part of and participate in and learn in and grow in? Before we start naming colleges, which it's inevitable. We can't avoid it. You know, I think one thing that stands out in my mind is the fact that, oh, geez, maybe it was 10 years ago. There's going to be some basketball fan that's going to set me right on this. But UVM was in Sweet 16. The men's basketball team was in the Sweet 16 for March Madness. And the UVM's application skyrocketed. And it wasn't because they had some amazing program that suddenly came on the horizon. It was because people saw the UVM team in their green and gold, I say outfits, but uniforms, and they added UVM to their list. And so there's a lot of sort of non sequitur or sort of hard to know why a school is on a student's list. But I really want to emphasize that thinking about their selves, thinking about what's important to them, what their skill set is, how they want their skill set to grow, and what kind of school community they want to be in is a good first question to ask. So that's really where we try to start, and with juniors, you know, the knowing that some of the reality is that we have this pull of urgency, right? There are timelines that are connected to this process, and so we're sort of running around, circling around sort of that sense of urgency. But, you know, I think it's really important to put the brakes on, speak in quiet tones when you're talking to your junior. Give them space when they're freaking out or if they are freaking out, and allow time to step back and think more carefully about them. Like, who am I as a student? What do I enjoy studying? What kind is this? Is a school that has 950 students or so feel too big or too large or just right to me? How far away do I want to be from home? What do I want to study? What kind of relationship do I want to have with professors? Do I want to continue to play the sport or be in the activity that I want to be in? Is the campus one that's comfortable for students who are LGBTQ? Or do I want to be at a HBCU after being a student of color in a predominantly white school? So those kinds of questions, I think we should start with our juniors, rather than, this is the form you need to fill in. Here's the Common App, like, take the SAT or not, so that they are just a little bit clearer about who they are and who they're becoming or who they want to become. So that's sort of my first want. It's all about you. Let's talk about you, not it's all about you. Let's talk about colleges and what you need to do. It's all about you. Let's talk about you. Just sort of the pieces of the pie, just in terms of calendar. What happens is I go into junior classes in mid-January and introduce myself and introduce the process. And in years past, I've handed them what is the junior handbook, and that we're actually going virtual with sort of the pieces of that handbook is going to be more of different documents that are looking at specific parts of the process that will be in the virtual office, that is the guidance office. And I will talk briefly, and I'll be honest, I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to get to juniors. What I'm hoping is that they will hear from me, and they'll have a number of opportunities asynchronously to learn about the process, and then we will open it up for meetings, family meetings that include the junior and their parents and guardians. It's using Google Meets, which has been worked really well, really just to sort of, for me to learn about you and your student, and for students to ask questions, and for parents or guardians to ask questions. So that happens in the spring. Admissions reps visit in the spring also. And they are very aware of the fact that we're not able to get on campus, and trying to use lots of different ways to provide information to families and students without the ability to get there. Some schools have opened up and have had drive tours or self tours, abiding by the safety precautions of the campus. For instance, Smith College they have signs all over campus that say you must wear masks, and they have provided sort of audio tour. So there are just lots of ways that you can take a tour without sort of the traditional, there's a student that's walking around. But they also are providing information sessions, opportunities to sit in on classes, opportunities to meet with current students, because they realize that we are we're having to suspend disbelief, and not being on campus. And so colleges are working very, very hard to connect with you and your students in this remote reality. So that's something just to realize, that colleges are refining how they are talking to students and families, and they are really working hard to find ways to get to you and your students. So that is kind of one, I think, one piece that I want to point out. There's that. I think one big question that people have is what impact does COVID-19 have on this process? I think there are some I don't knows for the class of 2022, but one reality that is that a number of schools that have been really score driven. When I say score driven, that have relied heavily on the SAT or the ACT for entrance are test optional definitely for the class of 2021. Some schools said that they were test optional just for the year. Others we're really going to have to wait to see what they say about the next year. But I think that schools are figuring out a holistic admissions process, which I think is good for students on a number of levels. That colleges are taking more time to read applications, and they are they're I think looking much more subjectively at students, not just looking at a GPA and a SAT score and deciding whether or not a student is admissible. I think in my career, I've seen some really amazing students who are really capable, who haven't scored well and haven't gotten into selective colleges, and I can point to their SAT scores as the reason, and not whether or not a student was capable, which isn't really, I think, looking deeply at an applicant when we're that score driven. And so what that reality right now is that while ARHS it has spring SAT slots dates that are available, it has everything to do with health and safety. And so those dates, while they're up, may get canceled. And I think, I'm starting at the end and just saying that what you want to think about with your junior is what you can control versus perseverating on what we don't have any control over, which is whether or not the date is going to get canceled in March, whether or not a school is going to be test optional. What students do have the ability to control is what they're doing in school, what courses they're taking, how they're managing extracurricular activities, even in the world of remoteness, what kinds of relationships they have with their junior teachers, because those are the people that are going to write recommendations. And just sort of thinking about what they, being engaged in the process around essays and all those other logistics. Those are things that you can control. Whether or not a school is going to be test optional is something that you're not able to control. And so I think focusing on what you can control versus what you cannot control is a really super duper healthy way to go about this process. And so I think that's my 2 cents. Like, focus on what you are able to control, and don't perseverate on what you can't control. I have a little smile on my face because at this moment, my brother is texting me about his senior who is refusing to log into College Board and send his scores. So, and I'm not going to answer that text. I should have turned my phone off. But those are the kind of the sort of the struggles that we are entering into with our juniors and our seniors. Like I think if I had to psychoanalyze it, this senior is trying to have control, and his dad is on the other end, sort of asking auntie to try and help out. So if free college counseling from Auntie Deidre. So I think if I had to say there are 5 things that you need to pay attention to, it's getting solid grades and appropriately challenging classes. So that's not to say take as many AP and honors classes as you can. Take an appropriate number of challenging classes. stay involved in extracurriculars in meaningful ways, even if it's remote, right? So that's important. I think thinking about the summer as being sort of enrichment opportunities, like starting to have an eye, even if sort of traditional summer approaches can't happen, like thinking about ways that your youngster can be involved, or thinking with them about ways that they can pursue their interest during the summer is also important. And then starting, after you've sort of done the internal personal review, starting to think about a list and starting to spend time just going online and looking what colleges have to offer. And then lastly, like if there's some schools that are really pushing, like have been really just only had a 1 year hiatus on the SAT or ACT, like looking at your list to see what schools are saying about testing policies. I think, certainly some of that standardized testing is happening at home. That definitely happened with the AP last year. So that's my short list on what to think about in terms of process. And then you will be invited to schedule a meeting in late January, early February with me. And it's a good sort of first step. Students will be asked to prepare a survey where they answer questions prior to meeting with me, and we use online links, and so we're pretty accessible, and in terms of being able to set a time to meet with me, as well as I think it's perfectly appropriate to have conversations with your for your student to have conversations with their school counselor, because they know them really well, about sort of what they think they should be considering as well. I don't feel at all territorial about the conversation around college and career. There are lots of people in the building that can sort of engage your junior around this. So that I think, that's sort of my sort of 2 cents about process. I guess it makes sense to open it up to questions that you might have about the process. That's a great question. So the question, I guess, it came up. Here's what I think. Your junior is experiencing school in the same way that juniors across the world are experiencing school. Like some are hybrid, some are like outside running around in the snow, some are in person. And so colleges are all looking at it in the same context. They understand that. But I think here's some things that your junior can do. There are office hours still, right? Checking in with a teacher a couple of times for office hours to have a conversation, I think is important. That's important no matter what. It's what I tell college students that I'm working with, like stay for office hours, ask questions, like establishing a relationship that is remote is going to be important. Colleges have not backed away from the idea that they want junior and sometimes senior year teachers. They're really sticking to that. And some of that is developmental. Who a student is as a junior or senior in terms of emerging college readiness has much more weight as a junior or a senior than a ninth or 10th grader. It is great if it's a teacher that you have as a junior and you had them in ninth or 10th grade so they can chart growth, but they are still going to prefer, I haven't heard anything different, junior year and senior year teachers. That's a good question. And just to elaborate on that, here's what they're looking for: an English or social studies teacher, so one of the humanities, and a math or science teacher. So we have a process in the spring that we managed actually pretty well remotely, where students connected with their junior year teachers. Granted, they had a little more time in the physical classroom, but we do guide them through the process of asking for recommendations and thinking through who they will ask. And it went pretty well. Actually, in some ways, better. It was actually a more accessible process in some ways for some students because it was remote. But thanks, Sarah, for asking that question. That's a good question. So landing on junior teachers, maybe senior year if you're applying regular decision, meaning have a January deadline. And just in terms of timeline, one thing that didn't change, interestingly enough, despite COVID, were early deadlines and regular decision deadlines. So the first deadline that we encounter is November 1st. Which comes pretty quickly. There's November 1st and November 15th. Those are what are called early decision or early action deadlines. Early decision is, this is your love, the person that you will never leave. Early decision is a binding agreement where you say, I want you, and if you pick me, I will never leave you. And so that's early decision. Early action is, I like you, and I like to date you, maybe not marry you, but will you date me? And that means you apply November 1st, November 15th, December 1st, December 15th, and the new fun thing is that there are some January 1st and January 15th early action 2 dates where students hear early, and they are not, it's not a binding decision. They still get to apply to other schools. So students that apply earlier get a decision earlier. They do not have to commit until May. And early decision students essentially are saying, if you say yes to me, I'm locked in. And then regular decision is tends to be January 1st. There's some January 4th dates, which I'm not sure what that's about, and some January 15th dates for regular decision. And there's also rolling, which means colleges just give students their answer when their application is complete. They disperse scholarship money as they have it until they don't. And so you can apply rolling sometimes as late as June. So there are just a range of ways to apply for students. All right. Let's see. So Jessica asked, what other college search websites do I recommend besides Naviance? And you're welcome. Happy to be here. The website, there's a couple of websites that I like let's see, what's a favorite of mine? There's one that is called College Express, which I'm trying to see if there's learning this technology. Is there a way for me to put it in the chat box? Maybe not. let's see. So it's called College Express. That is a good one. It's actually connected to a fellow named Steve Antonoff, who wrote a wonderful book called College Match. The reason I like the book College Match is because it starts with self-inventories. Who am I? What do I care about? And then it goes into colleges, but he compiled all these different lists of schools. And so it's like, what's a great school for cafeterias? Who has the best cafeterias? That might be a little more esoteric than it really is there, but it just hundreds of lists that he has put in one place. And so I think that is a great way to just sort of, for students to skulk around, to think about different kinds of lists. So I tend to start with College Express when I'm talking with students. College Board is fine. I think in some ways the graphics are a little bit more friendly to a 17 or 18-year-old, not being a 17-year-old, 18-year-old myself, but I think sometimes it's just a little bit more user friendly. So I do like College Express as well. And then another website is one that sort of came through, is through the federal government, the DOE, the Department of Education, which has is called the College Navigator, which I think is a fine search site. But there's so many. It's amazing the energy that has gone into college search sites. And I do have, on the guidance website in my office, there are a number of those lists are there. Let's see. Doug is asking, can I talk a bit about how colleges are looking at taking a gap year? What do they perceive as useful time spent, and how do students document their experiences? So there are a couple of ways to do a gap year. One is to apply to colleges, sort of the both and, apply to colleges and then defer. A number of students deferred from the class of 2020, and schools ended up becoming more versant around deferring and gap years. So UMass Amherst asked students to document their learning and provide that before they go to UMass. Some schools are really totally free and open. They say you say you want to defer, you want to take a gap year, they say yes, and then you come the semester or year later. So it all depends. I think so Doug, the answer to that is it really is, I think if a student can speak to their learning and growth, it's considered acceptable. A student can work at as a babysitter or an au pair for an entire year and learn something and grow. And so the documenting of their experiences, if they've deferred at a school, the school will tell them what they need. If they haven't, I think really sort of thinking about journaling and video and vlogs and blogs to document sort of what you've done is a good way to sort of actively record what a student has done over time. The PSAT. So the PSAT is the preliminary SAT. We didn't offer it in October for safety reasons. There is another date that College Board has announced, which is January 26th. And I think that has everything to do with whether or not that's a healthy time to have 30 kids in a room in the middle of the winter taking the test. And so right now, this is a great I don't know question. Generally, what College Board has done for people who have missed the PSAT, because it is something that qualifies students for the National Merit Scholar Qualifying Test, which is scholarships money, they provide an alternative. So they might say, if you take the SAT by June, then we'll use those scores for the National Merit Scholar qualifying test. But we haven't heard from College Board, to my knowledge, sort of what the alternatives are. Again, I think there are I have a couple of thoughts about like, I think the best thing a student can do is sort of engage with their academics. Like, that's the best prep that exists. But preparing for the PSAT or SAT, Khan Academy has a free website for that. Sort of really is what Khan Academy did was contract with Kaplan and to make the prep more accessible. But so many schools are really test optional, meaning you don't have to send your test in, or test blind, meaning they're not going to take your test. So what's a test blind school? MCLA, Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, is now test blind. They've said they're not taking SATs at all. And the University of California system is saying they're not using SAT because they're biased along racial lines. So they're not going to use SATs or ACTs ever again. And so I think sort of one question that I think you want to ask is the degree to which, what is the value of a score-driven school for your student? And are they going to be better served by schools that are looking at students much more holistically? And so I think that's a sort of a half answer to your question, Lisa. Thanks. It's definitely sort of where it's a wait and see answer. That's one of the things we can't control. Let's see, make sure. There's a great Boston Public Library has test prep materials available free. Thank you. Yeah, there's also now it just totally slipped out of my head. I will remember and say what it is, but there is another site that I think is pretty good, and it will come back to me. Hopefully not at 2 a.m. Early decisions. Okay, so Common App is a cool site. Common App is like a clearinghouse. Maybe you applied to college and you filled out 10 applications, 10 separate applications. You had the same name, the same birth date, the same social security number, but you wrote that 10 times. What the Common App allows is to fill the basic information in once, including the essay, the main essay, and then schools ask very specific questions, which we call supplemental questions. The Common App is open right now. Students can actually sort of create their Common App now. It does a little dishwash and throws away all the supplemental questions, but the basic information stays. On August 1st, it reopens after having shut down for a couple of weeks in July. I think for students that are applying early and students that are applying regular can start to fill that in the summer. And again, this is like you as a family deciding what level of push and pressure to put on your students to get started early. Like, you're going to start to see where they are and how ready they are for that. Like, don't turn it into a knockdown drag out fight if your junior isn't interested in doing that in June, right? So, like, I think having de-escalated conversations, sometimes actually scheduling conversations is a good, healthy way as a family. Like, every other Saturday, we're going to talk about your life after AHS process, right? Like, even step back from college. Don't assume that that's the next step, and start to have regular conversations so that you can gauge sort of what level of stress your junior is willing to take on and what level of stress you're able to take on. And again, like, asking for the buffer, asking for the auntie or the neighbor, or sometimes outside consultants to help de-escalate this conversation. Let's see. I guess one other piece, one piece that I think comes up for students is the NCAA clearinghouse. Speaking of clearinghouses, athletes who are hoping to play Division I or Division II have to meet requirements that are set by the NCAA, and they create an account through the NCAA. I mean, don't have a ton of students that utilize that reality, but if you are a student athlete, or you have a student athlete, spending time in the NCAA clearinghouse, like creating an account and being aware of what the requirements are around athlete recruitment is a good idea to sort of begin now, if you haven't already. I think one little caveat that I have around athlete recruitment is that I think it really makes sense to be alongside your student, because coaches sometimes are really enthusiastic and they sell some you know I don't know. They sell a kettle of fish sometimes, like, you're my top recruit, I really want you. And they're not always aligned with what the admissions office is saying. And so, sort of really closely monitoring the conversation, asking, where does my student stand in recruitment, is really important. And being in touch with admissions offices as well as coaches, to make sure that the conversation is consistent and aligned is a really important piece. So the NCAA does have a website that talks about recruitment and talks about sort of what kinds of contact is acceptable. Division D3 schools don't offer scholarships and have a slightly different set of requirements. Sometimes Division III schools strongly encourage students to apply early decision, and if they're a top recruit, and so that, again, like, is your student ready to make that level of commitment, is a conversation that you would want to have as a family. Any other questions? Something I didn't cover? I do want to just talk a little bit about ways to look to sort of get more information about colleges. They all have websites. Websites obviously are putting schools in their very best light, but it is a start. I think going deeper than the admissions page is really important. So going to, if your students are saying, I want to study psychology, going to the psychology department, looking at what's required to be a psychology major, taking a look at professors and seeing what they've written, what their focus is, finding out about uh, if you can sit in on a class that's in the psychology department, I think is important. Talking to students that are studying psychology, asking, can I talk to a freshman that is studying psychology to see what their experience is like, is really important, just in terms of going a little bit more deeply than what is a real sort of manicured approach or way of talking about a school, right? Like, you're going to put your best foot forward on a tour, live or online, but beginning to sort of dig a little deeper into websites to know what's being offered. And then I think using less official ways to look at schools, like Instagram accounts. I think one thing that happened after the George Floyd murder, there was a lot of conversations about access and equity on college campuses. And so a lot of websites called Black at UMass, Black at Yale, Black at UC Boulder came up. And so regardless of what your race or ethnicity is, if you're someone that's concerned about social justice and equity, going on Instagram to see what students are saying, knowing that it's their opinion, is another way to sort of look a little more carefully at a school. Going on Instagram, plugging the college in to see what's going on social media wise about a college campus is just a way to just get a little more honest and real about what's happening. I think there's another website that is doing a little bit of tracking of that, which is called edmit, EDMIT.me /browse, which is doing a great job of both pulling recent news articles about schools, looking at their financial health, and also reporting on the demographics. So it's also spending a lot of time outlining the college process, 9th through 12th. And so I think I really love that website. I think the affordability question is one that we all have. And so they answer quite a bit about affordability on that website. And it allows families to compare apples to pears, as opposed to sort of apples to Lego blocks. I think you can sort of look at each school that you're considering and see where they stand using the metrics that AdmitMe has put forth. Any other questions? There are more and more virtual websites that aren't sponsored, that are sponsored independently. Let's see, if I had to name one, it would be Campus Reel. It's real as in the old-fashioned movie reel. So CampusReel.org is a great website. But their online college fairs, which I will send all of that. Naviance for juniors will be up and running at the new year, and so that you will. Parents will be invited. They'll get a registration link, and juniors already are connected. It's connected to their ARPS email. Coming to some agreement with your junior about email. This is the deal. Email is not the way of communicating for high school students. It is remains the mode of communication for colleges and old college and career advisors like me. So agreeing, coming up with an agreement for checking email is really important, because that's how colleges are communicating with students. That's how colleges are saying, you're missing this part of your application. And so if they're not checking their email, they're not getting that information. If I'm saying, hey, I'm offering this Common App session, and it's coming through their email, and it is in Naviance as well. So I think the college process is a little behind the times around that. But I think it really impressing, and we do too, upon your junior to check their email once a week even, is a good idea. For students that want to go to college but don't have any idea where they want to go or what to study, what is a recommended way to take the next step if a tough subject? I think sort of the having the values conversation, like what's important to you conversation, is a good first way to go. And then there's another website that I really like, which I actually really encourage juniors to do before they meet with me, which is this app called Coursava CardSort. So it's CORSAVA.com. And it really is it's about 168 questions that allow students to go a little deeply into sort of what they're interested in. And like, do you want to go to a small school? Do you want to be a big fish in a little pond? What majors do you want to have access? Do you want to be on a liberal campus, a conservative campus? Like, a religious do you want to go to school that is connected with the Catholic Church? Like, it asks all these questions, and then to sit down and look at what the student has done, I think is a good way to go. I think using the relationship that exists through school counselors as well, like asking your student to meet with their school counselor, just to talk about it, because it's good to have sort of once removed conversations. I think they're a little bit less activated when they're talking with somebody else. I think that is a good way to start to have that conversation. Somebody peeks over the fence and says, where are you going to college? Grandpa says, where are you going to college? Like, you walk in the store and the person knows that you're a junior. Where are you going to college? Like, it's a little bit fraught. And so I think taking a step back is totally a way to go. I think a real good question for parents and guardians is how they encounter stress. How do they deal with stress? And knowing, you've been watching your junior, how they deal with stress, sort of really weaving, how do I handle difficult conversations into this process, I think is really, really important. Oh yeah, sure. It's CORSAVA.com. And that's something that I will provide in my first email that I send to juniors. It's awesome. I love it. Now here's the thing about Coursava course. You do that and it doesn't spit out all these names of schools. That's not what happens. It says, here's what's important to you. Here's what you must have. Here's what would be nice. Here's what you don't care about. And so then sort of it's the beginning of a conversation about what's important to me. right? I think we're so used to plugging things in and having schools spit out, or the results spit out to us. But it really, what it is doing is asking people to real juniors and seniors and ninth graders too, what's important to you. And centering the conversation around your student, versus around the schools that they're going to apply to. But there are just so many ways to learn. I think that's really important to just talk about. Like, there are just these rich AmeriCorps programs that students can engage in. There certificate programs that community colleges that give people incredible skills. Like, I can't tell you how much I love every phlebotomist that I have had has drawn my blood, that knows what they're doing, because they spent 16 weeks in a certificate program. They are so much different than the pediatrician that turned me into a pincushion when I was a kid, because they have high training. So, I think they're just their apprenticeships. There are a lot of things to explore with students, and so that's important. Um, if schools look for SAT scores on their programs, not that I'm aware of. I think you have to sort of do the work of going on the ACT website and the College Board website to look to see what test sites are available in your area. Yeah, and I think the many schools put on hiatus for more than 1 year the SAT. I think Ivy Leagues maybe said we're not going to do it for a year. There's a lot of conversation amongst um, admissions officers on the high school side of things, around access and equity, really pushing schools to think carefully about the SAT, and it's where it is in terms of bias, like that we just know exists. And so asking schools to really consider landing on looking at students holistically. But that's, I think, in terms of testing sites, safety is a big deal. Is if your students there and nervous that they're going to get COVID, like, are they being their best self? Like, those are two sort of questions that I think you want to ask as a family. Something that we have seen happening is that, families with a fair amount of privilege are traveling to other places. The New York Times has written about it. And so asking colleges to also sort of be aware of sort of the pressure that's being put on families, and what is kind of a untenable situation right now. Maybe that will feel different in the spring, but really asking schools to take this off the plate of families, because the level of anxiety is high around it. Another great website around testing, fairtest.org, is tracking schools that are test optional or test blind, even if temporarily. So that's fairtest.org. And they just have, that list has grown really exponentially. And so that's a good site to use to track whether or not a school is going to be test optional. They're really tremendous, and doing the work that they've done. The National Association of College Admissions Officers also has a website. So that site is nacacnet.org. And then it points to what is called the newsroom, that is tracking what schools' policies, whether or not they're open right now, if they're remote. It's a great site to just see where schools are in terms of their policy. And then the test prep site that I'd mentioned that I'd forgotten is called Compass Prep, COMPASSPREP.com. And they actually have a number of webinars that can be helpful. All right, any final questions from people? What I'm gonna do is in the guidance office, my office, I'm gonna put something that that is just a list of what one can be doing, along with the links that I mentioned, so that I'll post it up in my office, and you can that's in the guidance office, which I'm trying to think the best way to get to that. It's in my signature, but there is a link that's available for the guidance office, and then there are doors for every counselor, and I'll have in my office the notes from tonight with the links to the sites that I mentioned, and some links to sites that I didn't list as well. So yeah. Thanks for being here tonight. And I'm looking forward to working with you and your students. And breathe, 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 breathe. That's really the key to this process. And I guess I'll text my brother back about his senior.